Hello. Okay. You are closer than you think. Somehow, in spite of all the troubles I had in school, I managed to get into a local university. I thought being a freshman in college meant a last opportunity to make a fresh start. I dreamt about making my family proud and to showing the world, and more important, myself, that I did have the potential to succeed. I was in a new environment. College professors taught differently than high school teachers did, and no one at this college had any preconceived notions about me. I worked my butt off, but I actually wound up doing even worse in my college classes than high school. A few months into this, I started to face my reality. I couldn't see the point of wasting time and money that I did not have. I was ready to quit school altogether. I told a friend about my plans and he suggested that before I made a decision, I go with him to visit his family for the weekend. He thought that getting me away from the campus might give him some perspective. When we arrived, his father showed me around their property before dinner. Along the way, he asked how school was going for me. It was the worst question anyone could ask me at that time, and I'm sure my response stunned him. I erupted into tears, holding back the not holding back the tears, crying, but straight up bawling. I could see he was taken aback by this, but his innocent question had broken the dam holding back so many pent up emotions. I told him the whole boy with a broken brain story while he listened patiently. When I was finished, he looked me directly in the eyes. Jim, why are you in school? He said. What do you wanna be? What do you wanna be? What do you wanna do? What do you want to do? What do you wanna what do you wanna have? What do you wanna share? I didn't have immediate answers to any of these questions because no one had ever asked me them before, but I felt as though I needed to answer them now. I started to speak and he stopped me. He tore a couple of pieces of paper from his pocket diary and told me to write down my answers in this book. I'll show you how to ask questions to learn and achieve anything faster. I spent the next several minutes writing a bucket list. When I was finished, I began folding up the papers and preparing to put them in my pocket. But as I was doing so, my friend's father grabbed the pages out of my hand. I freaked out because I didn't think what I'd written was going to be read by anyone else, especially this complete stranger. But he opened the pages and read while I stewed in my discomfort. It seems as though he took hours to read what I'd written, though I'm sure it was only a minute or two. When he finished, he said, "You're this close," holding the index finger on his right and left hands about a foot apart, to getting every single thing on that list. That statement seemed absurd to me. I told him I couldn't crack this list if I had 10 lifetimes, but then he took his fingers and, without expanding the distance between them, placed one on each side of my head. The space he was describing was my brain. "That's the key," he said. "Come with me, I have something to show you." We walked back to the house where he took me to a room that I'd never seen before. It was filled wall to wall, floor to ceiling with books. Now remember, at that point in my life, I was not a fan of books. It was like being in a room full of snakes, but what made it even worse was that he started grabbing snakes from his cells and handing them to me. I looked at the titles and realized these were biographies of incredible men and women throughout history, as well as some early personal growth books such as The Magic of Thinking Big, The Power of Positive Thinking, and Think and Grow Rich. Jim, I want you to read one of these books a week. My first thought was, have you not been listening to anything I've been saying? I didn't ask this out loud, but I did respond. I don't know how I could do that. Reading doesn't come easily to me, and I have so much schoolwork to do. He helped me. He held up a finger, saying, "Don't let school interfere with your education." I later learned he was paraphrasing a quote often attributed to Mark Twain. "Look," I said, "I understand how reading these books would be really helpful, but I don't want you to make any promises I can't keep." He paused and then reached into his pocket, pulled out my bucket list, and started reading each one out loud. There was something about hearing my dreams in another person's voice that messed with my mind and my soul something fierce. Truth be told, many of the things on the list were things I wanted to do for my family, things my parents could never afford or would never have done for themselves, even if they could afford them. Hearing this out loud moved me in ways I didn't think possible. It deeply tapped me into my drive and purpose. We will unleash your motivation together in part 3. When he was finished, I told him I would do exactly what he suggested, though secretly I had no idea how I was going to accomplish that feat. Asking the right question. I went back to school after the weekend, aimed with the books Even armed with the books he'd given me on my desk were two piles, one that I had to read for school and one that I promised to read. The scale of what I had agreed to register with me, how was I gonna make a dent in this piles when reading was such a labor for me? I was already struggling to get through the first pile. What was I what was I gonna do? Where would I get the time? So I didn't eat, I didn't sleep, I didn't exercise, I didn't watch television or spend time with friends. Instead, I practically lived at the library until one night when I passed out from sheer exhaustion and fell down a flight of stairs, sustaining yet another head injury. It wasn't until 2 days later I woke up in the hospital. I thought I had died, and maybe a part of me wished that I had. It was truly a dark and low point in my life. I was wasting away. My weight was down to 117 pounds, and I was so dehydrated that I was hooked up to IV bags. As miserable as I was, I said to myself, there has to be a better way. At that moment, a nurse came into my room carrying a mug of tea with a picture of Einstein on it, the very same subject of the book report that inspired me to dig deep and study back in grade school. The quote next to his image said, "No problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it." That's when it dawned on me. Maybe I was asking the wrong question. I started to wonder what was my real problem. I knew I was a slow learner, but I had been thinking the same way about it for years. I realized that I was trying to solve my problems, my learning problems, by thinking the way I'd been taught to think, to just work harder. But what if I could teach myself a better method to learn? What if I could learn in a way that was more efficient, effective, even even enjoyable? What if I could learn how to learn faster? I committed in that very moment to finding that way, and with that commitment my mindset began to shift. I asked the nurse for a course bulletin and flipped through it page by page. After a couple hundred pages, I could find nothing but classes on what to learn: Spanish history, math, science, but there were no classes teaching students how to learning how to learn. When I got out of the hospital, I was so intrigued by the idea of learning how to learn, and I set my studies aside and focused only on the books that my mentor gave me, as well as books I found on about learning theory, multiple intelligence theory, neuroscience, personal growth, educational psychology, speed reading, and even ancient mnemonics. I wanted to know what older cultures did to pass on knowledge before they had external storage devices like the printing press and computers. I was obsessed to solve this riddle: how does my brain work? So I can work my brain. About a couple of months of deep immersion into my new self-directed studies, a light switch flipped on. My ability to focus was stronger. I started to understand new concepts because I was able to concentrate. I was no longer easily distracted. I could better recall information that I had studied weeks before with little difficulty. I had a new level of energy and curiosity. For the first time in my life, I could read and comprehend information in a fraction of the time that it used to take. My newfound competence gave me a sense of confidence that I had never felt before. My daily life changed too. I was clear. I knew what to do to move myself forward, and I unlocked an empowering and sustainable sense of motivation. With these results, my mindset changed, and I started to believe that anything was possible. But I was also upset. It seemed to me all of my years of self-doubt and suffering could have been avoided if this critical method of meta learning how to learn, had been taught in school. I remember teachers telling me constantly to study and concentrate harder. Telling a child to do things like concentrate is like telling them to play the ukulele. It's very difficult to do it without ever being taught how. And following the curious journey, I couldn't help but share the treasure and lessons I had learned. I started tutoring tutoring these methods to other students. The turning point came when I worked with a freshman who wanted to learn how to read faster, boost comprehension, and retain the information she was training. She worked diligently and achieved her goal of reading 30 books in 30 days. I knew how she did it. I taught her the method you learn in chapter 14, but I wanted to know why. I discovered that her motivation was that her mother had been diagnosed with terminal cancer, and she was determined to save her by studying books on health, wellness, and medicine. Months later, she called me crying tears of joy to tell me that her mother's cancer was in remission. It was in that moment that I realized that if knowledge is power, then learning is our superpower. And our capacity to learn is limitless. We simply need to be shown how to access it. Seeing the way this woman's life was changed ignited in me a purpose, allowing me to recognize what became my life's mission: to teach the mindset, motivation, and methods to upgrade your brain and learn anything faster so you can unlock your exceptional life. Over the course of more than 2 decades, I've developed a reliable and proven set of practical methods to enhance learning, many of which appear in this book. I have not only kept on promise to read a book a week, but continue to serve and support everyone from children labeled learning disabled to senior with brain aging challenges. Our team dedicated to the memory of my grandmother passionately supports Alzheimer's research, and we believe education is every child's birthright, funding the creation of schools around the world from Guatemala to Kenya, providing healthcare, clean water, and learning for children in need by amazing organizations such as WE Charity and Pencils of Promise. That's our mission, to build better, brighter brains. We're leaving no brain behind. I've taught these techniques to others with astonishing results, leading me to address more than 150,000 people in live audiences each year in every field imaginable, to serve as the brain coach to top personalities in sports and entertainment, to train at many of the world's leading companies and universities, to head a large accelerator learning online platform with students from 195 countries, and to host a top educational podcast called Quick Brain with tons of millions of downloads, and to have my teachings received hundreds of millions of videos views. This book is filled with lesson and practical advice I've learned over the years, along with wisdom and resources from many of the guest experts who have been featured on our show. I say all of this because, having dedicated my life to researching and teaching this subject, I know what's inside this book, and more importantly, I know what's inside you. I know what's inside you. Okay. Finding Professor X's school. There's serendipitous chord to this story. As I mentioned, I regularly offer brain coaching to CEOs and their dreams. A few years ago, Gian Polos, then CEO and chairman of 20th Century Fox, invited me to do a coaching session with his executive team. I went on to the film late on a Friday morning and spent several hours with task staff members. They were particularly open to my message, and they instantly connected with the techniques. When the session was over, Jim came up to me and said, "That was incredible. It was one of the very best training sessions we've ever held." I was delighted to hear this. Of course, who doesn't love positive feedback? Later, during a tour of the lot, my eyes landed on a poster for the Wolverine movie, which was scheduled to come out later that year. I pointed to the poster and said, "I can't wait to see that film. I'm a huge fan." "Oh, you like superheroes?" Jim said. "Love them. The X-Men have played a major role in my life." I went on to tell him about my childhood brain injury, how comic books helped me to learn to read, and my research for Professor X's school. He smiled at me. We have another 30 days of shooting on the next X-Men movie in Montreal. Why don't you come along and spend a week on the set? The actors would love to work with you." There was no way I was going to turn this down. I'd never been on a movie set before, and this wasn't just any movie set, it was an X-Men movie set. The next morning we got on the plane they called the X-Jet. The other passengers included most of the mutant cast, and I found myself sitting between Jennifer Lawrence and Halle Berry. This was turning out to be the best day ever. On the plane and the next week on set, I got to share some of my brain tips for speed reading scripts and for remembering lines with some of the extraordinary cast and crew. And guess what? The very first scene I got to see them shoot took place in Professor X's school, the very place I'd spent endless days imagining and searching for when I was a kid. It was such a surreal moment for me. What's one of your dreams? One of your dreams? One that is ever present like a splinter in your brain. Imagine it in vivid details, visualize it, feel it, believe it, and work daily for it. Amazingly, that's not the best part of the story. When I got back from the trip, I came home to find a package waiting for me. It was huge, about the size of a large flat screen TV. I opened the package and pulled out an enormous framed photograph of me with the entire X-Men cast. The photo had a note from the chairman which read, "Jim, thank you so much for sharing your superpowers with all of us. I know you've been looking for your superhero school ever since you were a child. Here's your class photo." See the full picture. Class. Unlimiting. The act or process of casting aside inaccurate and restrictive perceptions of one's potential and embracing a reality that, with the right mindset, motivation, and methods, there are no limitations. Unlimiting. Okay. Tomorrow unlimiting. Okay, so that's it, guys. Bye.